Today is one of those days where it just feels so good to be a Necromancer player. I have been testing minions for the last several days. I've been optimizing everything about them on the PTR, and I've been pushing them to their absolute limit. And I'm happy to report that I have absolutely crushed Pit 200, which is the hardest content in the game. I've had the uber bosses, the new level 200 uber bosses, completely on farm. This build is invincible against them and it kills them at a very strong pace. And overall, this build is just insane. This build is incredible. There has never been a minion build this good in D4, not even the old bugged Minion build. This build uses no bugs, no gimmicks, no weird stuff, just a bunch of big ass minions who destroy everything. And it is so fun to play. Now, one of the buffs that I knew was going to be a big deal, but I didn't realize how important it was the buff to the Shadow Mages. This buff makes your Shadow Mages' attacks pierce enemies, allowing each attack to hit multiple enemies. Then with this other buff where they get a double attack every 3 attacks instead of every 4th attack, this means that their damage has skyrocketed. You can see in all of this content, I walk up to mobs, I create a corpse, I corpse tendrils, and of course the corpse tendrils are gigantic because of that affix on gear that exists here on this PTR, and everything gets gripped into a pile, and the bolts are piercing everything, the golem's attacks are cleaving, and everything just gets obliterated in an AoE fiasco. Minions' main weakness, well, besides just the fact that they sucked and did no damage, was that their AoE was very low, but now it is extremely high. I tell you, minions are so good right now. Even with this massive increase in AoE, minions are still an extremely powerful single target build. This is because, all of your minions are attacking one target, and so of course they're going to do decent damage. We've also got a fairly high rate of stagger, and because of how powerful our Army of the Dead is, we're getting out a load of damage. Army of the Dead now represents a 90% damage buff from the Unyielding Commander's aspect. And what's really crazy, the thing that really blows my mind, as we get into all my gear and stuff, you're going to notice that my gear is nowhere near perfect, but it's still more than enough to obliterate the hardest content in the game. Now, minions, I did take through a lot of iterations. I tested Bone Storm minions, I tested the Army of the Dead minions, I tested all the different types of golems, I tested different types of mages, I tested different setups, and I do think that this is probably going to be roughly what we'll play in Season 4. Now, once we get the Season 4 mechanics, some things might change, but I do think this is very close to the final version of Minions. I don't think you're going to really want any uniques, besides maybe the new Uber unique Tyraels might, but everything else, it's just pure legendary, it's just pure ownage, and this build is so amazing. Let's start by talking about the Book of the Dead, because this is the most changed thing about the Minion build. So for starters, I still think Reapers are the best option. Now, you could run Skirmishers with the guaranteed crits. However, I have found that the Skeletal Warriors themselves aren't doing a lot of damage. They're more just a utility frontliner than they are the actual DPS. If you compare a warrior to a mage, or if you compare a warrior to the golem, it is astronomically less damage, and it is not worth investing into your warriors. So instead, we're going to be running an incredibly powerful effect, where your Reaper's power-up attack reduces all of your active cooldowns by 3 seconds, or rather, 1 random active cooldown, which is... We're going to talk about that more later, but you kind of actually want to be a little bit picky about what skills you put on cooldown so that they're actually hitting the skills you want them to hit. But this is going to apply to all of your Reapers, and they're going to cast it every 10 seconds. So to just do a quick little bit of math, we're going to have, I believe, 5 Reapers out. Each Reaper is going to do it once every 10 seconds, so on average you get 1 every 2 seconds. So every 2 seconds are going to be reducing a cooldown by 3 seconds. So on average, you're going to be roughly halving the cooldowns of all of our abilities. Just some napkin math, but that's how good it is, right? It's like better than Decrepify almost. It is incredibly strong. The other option is also decent for the corpse generation, but we get our corpses from our ultimate Army of the Dead, so it's totally not necessary. Now, for our mages, you have to go Shadow. I mean, you can run Bone for a single target. It's okay. But in any case where there's more than one target, and even oftentimes in single target, Shadow is leaps and bounds ahead of all the other mages. They have the double attack every 3 attacks. They've got the piercing bolts. I mean, Shadow is just so strong. Now, if you want to do a more golem-focused build, basically, so to give you guys a little bit more context, there is basically 2 main archetypes of minions at this point. There's pure mage and there's pure golem. Those are the 2 main things that you can do. You can either aim to buff the crap out of your golem or aim to buff your mages. Now, on gear, there's a new stat that rolls on helmet, chest, gloves, pants, and boots, which all of those pieces of gear can roll it, which is plus to the skeletal mastery. Now you can roll skeletal mage mastery or skeletal golem mastery here. And really what you want to do is you want to pick one and fully invest into it. And you can do a little bit of diversification if you want, but you're going to see as we get into more pieces of the build that you really want to invest heavily into one. And in my case, I opted to invest into the mages, where you're going to see why as we get into the Book of the Dead more. But in my case, I'm heavily investing into the mages, so I'm running the extra attack every 3. But if you're going with a golem build, you're going to want the 3% damage multiplier for every mage, because this is going to buff your golem. Now, for the golem itself, I tested bone, I tested blood, I tested iron, I tested everything. For pure DPS, the best option is Iron Golem with the every second attack you create a shockwave. This does a ludicrous amount of damage, and it's going to massively increase both the AoE, but also the single target damage of your golem. Now, in pure single target, the 50% damage buff Blood Golem is slightly better, but the problem with it is that because you need to spam the golem active in single target in order for the DPS, your Reapers are going to be hitting the golem cooldown reduction instead of always hitting Army of the Dead. And remember, Army of the Dead, once we get into the aspects, you're going to see gives us a 90% damage buff. So actually having a second skill on cooldown, because we have to spam Corpse Tendrils, so having 3 skills on cooldown, you start to divvy up your cooldown reduction from your Reapers too much. So I really just prefer the Iron Golem. Now, that being said, if you are heavily invested into mages like I am, then you can go the Blood Golem absorbs 30% of the damage you take. And this was a big piece that allowed this build to really start to take off. And I go back and forth still between these two options, but I think in general I do prefer the mage investment with the Blood Golem absorbing 30%. This is a very strong combo. Your Golem's still going to do a decent amount of damage, but your mages are going to be the bulk of your damage, and the Golem's going to give you the damage reduction. So that's kind of the mindset here. But like I said, for pure damage, Iron Golem with the Shockwave is crazy. So next, we're going to be talking about the skill tree, and there's a lot of new cool stuff in here. There's a lot of buffed things that we're using. There's a lot of changed things that we're using. So this is a cool part of the build. And just a reminder, this is PTR. This is not live. A lot of people were confused on my last video. And the other thing I want to say is that none of the websites have their builders updated yet. So unfortunately, I can't make a build and link it for you guys. So if you're playing PTR and you want to copy this point for point, you're just going to have to watch the video. So sucks to suck. But let's talk about skills. So Decompose. This skill used to suck, but it is now incredibly powerful. It is the best corpse generating basic skill, and it's going to apply vulnerable to enemies, which minions do not have a way to apply vulnerable outside of a few cases, but we'll get into why we're not using them. But this Decompose is incredibly important. It's going to give us the corpse for corpse tendrils, it's going to apply vulnerable in an AoE, and it's going to generate essence, which doesn't really do much, but it's the vulnerable in the corpse generation that's so important. We're running 3 points into Hued Flesh, of course, for the corpse generation. Then it's very important that we put 1 point into Spiked Armor at least. Now, I have an insane amount of armor on my gear. For Nightmare, or rather for Pit 100 and higher, enemies are level 199. This means you need about 17,000 armor to be armor capped, and you're definitely going to want to be it. And you can see here on my chest piece, I have like a Greater Affix triple masterworked armor. So I have plenty of armor, luckily. So what that means is I'm only putting 1 point into Spiked Armor, and the reason I'm doing that isn't for the armor itself, but instead it's for the Thorns, because remember, Thorns on minions procs Lucky Hit, so it's important that we have a little bit of Thorns. We're putting 3 points into Skeletal Warrior Mastery. I think you can argue not to do this. I like to do it just to make my warriors a bit tankier. Like I said, their damage is virtually trivial compared to the damage of everything else, but I do like the extra survivability on them because it allows content to just be cleared easier. Then we're taking 3 points into Fueled by Death, which is going to be procced whenever we raise a Skeletal Mage. 3 points into Death's Embrace for the damage reduction and damage. 3 points into Death's Approach for the movement speed. And then it's very important that we get Decrepify, Abhorrent Decrepify. Minions are proccing a ton of cooldown reduction. Like an absolute ton of cooldown reduction. This is an extremely important part of the build. Do not pass this up. And then we're putting 3 points into Amplified Damage so that after we Decrepify enemies, we're also getting the 12%. And what's cool about the Decrepify this season is that it is freaking massive. Because on a bunch of pieces of gear, we can only roll utility and defense, and our best utility options are either Corpse Tendril Size or Decrepify size. And both of those are really strong, but you can see like when I cast Decrepifies, it covers like the entire screen. Same with the Corpse Tendrils, but pretty funny. Now, Skeletal Mage Mastery, like I mentioned before, you can either focus on mages or golems based on whether you go Skeletal Mage Mastery or Golem Mastery. You can do a hybrid version if you wish. In general, it's going to be better to focus on one or the other. So, I rolled Skeletal Mage Mastery on all of my gear that I could. Obviously, I'm missing it on a bunch of pieces still, because this can go up to like 13 ranks, which is pretty freaking crazy. So that's really strong. Also putting 4 points to Corpse Tendrils for the cooldown reduction on it, and then I'm taking Blighted Corpse Tendrils for the Blood Orb generation. So remember, I'm getting vulnerable from Decompose, so I don't need vulnerable from Corpse Tendrils. On top of that, the Blood Orbs are actually really helpful for keeping us healthy and keeping our minions healthy. So basically, with this patch, you might be like, your reaction to this might be, that's dumb, I'll just drink a potion. Here's the issue. In this patch, we have 33,000 life. When you drink a life potion, which is a lot easier these days to have a potion running, you're going to be close to 40k. And when you have 40,000 life, this 1.2k instant heal is nothing. Now, the 35% over 3 seconds is still pretty good, but that instant heal is trivial. Actually, potions are not nearly sufficient anymore to keep you healthy, even just from stray damage that you're taking. You really want the Blood Orbs. And there's an aspect that we're running, the aspect of Fast Blood, where whenever we pick an orb, it reduces all of our ultimate cooldowns. And what's great is in this new patch, there is so much freaking density that every single time we Corpse Tendrils, we're going to be spawning like 20 Blood Orbs. We pick them all up, we reduce our ultimate cooldown by 40 seconds, and we ult again. And you're going to see the uptime in Army of the Dead and AoE is absolutely mental. Between the Decrepify and the Reapers, and that, the uptime is wild. And then we cash out with the Unyielding Commanders, which can roll up to 100% damage. Very, very powerful, right? Very powerful. So, Blighted Corpse Tendrils ends up being substantially better than Plague Corpse Tendrils in this build. So, moving on. So, Reaper's Pursuit, this is going to give us movement speed on Decompose, but the real reason we're running it is to get access to Gloom, and so we can get access to Terror. Now, both of these are going to be buffing the mages, and like I said, my build is very mage-focused, so it's very important for me to take these. If you're more golem-focused and the mages are more just utility, you might opt for other options instead, but for me, that's what I'm taking. Moving down, Army of the Dead. It's an okay ability. I don't think Army of the Dead is anything exceptional. I would prefer Bone Storm, but however, the Army of the Dead damage ends up being quite a bit, and basically what I learned was, as I got into higher and higher pits, I was just dying even with Bone Storm. Like, at first I was running Bone Storm, Aspect of Shielding Storm with Shadow Blight, and I was just getting ridiculous amounts of shielding and ridiculous amounts of tankiness, but I was still just getting one-shot by mechanics. It was either like I could tank a hit, or it would one-shot me. And what I found was, as I reduced my survivability, the things that were one-shotting me before were still one-shotting me, but the things that weren't one-shotting me before weren't one-shotting still. So what that means is that you actually don't want to overly invest into defense anymore, because at a certain point, you'll tank all the avoidable damage, and if you get hit by something unavoidable, or other way around, sorry. If you get hit, like, okay, so you're fighting a level 200 boss, right? It spawns the Lilith waves. If you get hit by a Lilith wave, it doesn't matter if you have Shielding Storm and Bone Storm, you're gonna die. So you might as well just opt into more damage anyway. You can tank a hit or two from mobs, but you're gonna die to one-shots. You just kind of had to accept that. It's just the way the game is now. So, that's why we're not running Shielding Storm. We're going full offense, and it ends up working out pretty good. Inspiring Leader is going to give us and the minions 12% crit. Hellblade Commander is going to give the minions 45% damage. Bonded in Essence is going to give the minions tons of healing. And then we're taking Kalen's Edict, which is going to give our minions about 36% attack speed, which is a ton. Now, I think there's a bug, okay? So, somebody nerdier than me is going to have to test this. Maybe I'll test it later. But, for all you Giga nerds, so Cult Leader is going to give you a damage multiplier for every 20% attack speed your minions have. And keep in mind, I tested this. It does work with attack speed that affects you and not your minions. So like here I have 25%. When I equip the necklace, it actually tremendously increases the damage of the minions. But even though I had enough stats on gear to get to 100% attack speed, when I swapped from Shadow Blight to Kalen's Edict, my minions' damage went up tremendously. Even though I was well over the cap, and I tested it and showed that the minion attack speed damage does scale with your attack speed. So something bugged is happening here. It might be the case that you can stack your attack speed and minions' attack speed and that they could both stack up to 100. I don't know exactly what's going on, but I found that this was tremendously more damage. So, okay. Lastly, we're going to look at the Paragon board. So we're going to be running the Golem Mastery for 25% damage, and then we're going to be coming up here, we're going to be running Cult Leader, and then we're going to be grabbing Dead Razor for the damage reduction and damage for the minions. Now, you're going to see a lot of these nodes we aren't taking anymore. We're not taking armor anymore, we're not taking the resistances anymore, we're not taking Skeletal Warrior damage anymore, and the reason for all of this is because A, your Skeletal Warriors don't do any damage, and B, your minions inherit 100% of your stats, which means you don't need the armor, you don't need the magic resist for them, because if you look at my stats, 17,000 armor, capped out on resistances, minions are going to be the exact same way. So all of these stats are useless. And if you look at my skill tree here, you'll also see that I'm not taking Death's Defense for the same reason, because it's useless now. It doesn't do anything, because the minions are already capped on everything, so what's the point? And then we're going to be moving into Flesh Eater for 40% damage. We're going to get the Glyph of Control for 20% damage multiplier against CC'd enemies. And this now applies to slows as well, which is really strong. So all CC'd enemies are going to be getting owned. We're coming up here, we're grabbing Darkness, which is really good. We're getting a lot of the Golem buffs, and we are grading Hulking Monstrosity. I still think it's worth to at least get Hulking Monstrosity, even if you're playing Mage Focus. I'm not fully convinced about getting all these Golem nodes. It's something I'm going to have to think about more later. But for now, that's what I'm running. And then I've got Scent of Death, and then I'm running Territorial for the damage reduction. Coming down here, I'm grabbing Dragging Shadows for damage reduction from enemies affected by shadow damage. So, real quick, let's talk about gear. Aspect of Might on the helmet for 20% damage reduction. And then you just want Skeletal Mage Mastery or Golem Mastery, max life, you know, all this stuff, right? You want to get to armor cap, all of that. On the chest, Aspect of Hardened Bones, probably Necromancer's best aspect now. It's incredible. On our gloves, we're going to be running the Unyielding Commander's aspect for 100% damage multiplier while your Army of the Dead is active. The damage reduction component of this is not super relevant, and even though it says minions gain plus 80%, it is definitely not plus. It is times 80%. Coming down here, I'm actually running Aspect of Protector on pants, which is kind of weird, but I like the increased survivability. I think it is pretty decent. On boots, I am running the Occult Dominion. On my weapon, I'm running the Aspect of Reanimation, and also, very importantly, for your tempered stats, you really want to roll minion attack speed on this, because remember, that's going to scale the Paragon, and it's just going to be flat attack speed, right? So this is very powerful. A necklace, Aspect to Grasping Veins. Minions now get 100% of your crit and 100% of your crit damage. You can see this necklace has 20% crit chance on it, 25% attack speed, which they're getting 100% of both of those things, and they're getting the crit damage from the tendrils. So this is a gigantic damage multiplier for minions now, just like it is for every other build. We're running Aspect of Frenzy Dead for 45% attack speed for Cult Leader and all that. And then on our other aspect, we are running the Fast Blood. Now, my Fast Blood is only a 1.1. I really want to play this build with a 2.5, but because of the Codex bug, my Codex got reset and I lost my 2.5 roll and I never got to test it. But I really think this build with the 2.5 is going to be stupid. It'll be so funny. But yeah, that's basically the build, guys. Thank you guys for watching. Sorry I don't have a build link. And a reminder again, this is PTR. Okay, this is not the live game. This is the test realm. This is season 4. This is more just interesting theorycraft stuff than it is, you know, useful for you guys playing live. But thank y'all for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.